Paul was born, and Paul was named Paul Andrew Quinn, Andrew being after Tom's father, who was Andy Quinn, and who later Paul named his own son Andy Quinn. And Paul, as I say, they got steadily bigger babies. Paul weighed 9'6", if I remember right. And I know the nine's right, some of the ounces.
I remember the doctor commented, he looked at him and said, "Hey, he's gonna walk home." He's big enough.
And what was his date of birth?
March 28th.
28.
And what would the year be then?
59.
Actually, it was
59.
Easter Sunday.
It was. And then Carolyn, there's a year, I think there's 17 months between Carolyn and Paul, so she didn't care that much. She was just like a little less than 2 years old, standing there in her long slip. So.
And what kind of a baby was Paul?
Where Carolyn was very expressive and very real bright eyes and everything, Paul was more laid back, more kind of like Gretchen, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid again. They all seemed to be more laid back, and but Paul was very stubborn. He's the only one. Well, we think maybe Quinn being stubborn might be an Irish trait, but it was more obvious in Paul. But because he would never tantrum, of which the three older ones would have a tendency to tantrum. He never did. And he would sit there and he would just sit down on the sidewalk and you couldn't pick him up. He was chunky and he just would make himself dead weight.
Yeah, he just, tighten up all his muscles, It was really hard to get him picked up.
But tantrum, he never caused a lot of problems. And I would say Paul was the least academic in school. He always liked sports a lot. And we kind of shuffled Paul along in school. He was very smart. It wasn't a question of being smart, it was a question of he was not as interested. And we would always just kind of, I think he was in the middle of kids that did real well academically, and that kind of pushed him along too. He didn't want them to excel too much over him.
I remember kids would have to write things for detention, and Paul would do it and then sell them to the kid. And
Paul and Carolyn both liked music too.
Yeah.
And Paul liked sports, of course. He played ball too, right?
And Paul and Carolyn were very good friends growing up, and they played house a lot. Carolyn always bossed Paul, so we've always heard about that. But then they got married. They pretended that they got married and that they went to the cozy corner on their honeymoon. So that kind of said to us, maybe we're going to the cozy too often. But then when Charlie came along, the three of them were really tight friends for many, many years. So maybe we go on to...
Okay, and Paul graduated in '77 from Rosecrans.
Yes.
And they were always in high school plays and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. No, they were, all the kids were, except Gretchen. She didn't do that. But,
Okay.
yeah, and Paul graduated with a good point average. All along the way, he wanted to take the easier subjects and never take any of the hard. And we always would convince him, well, you need that for college. And he'd say, I don't want to go to college. And we'd say, well, you don't want to go now, but you might want to go later. And you don't want to close the door. You need to keep your options open. So he would groan and say, okay, and he would go. But I think he was glad because he did go.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to go, had the courses, but it's kind of hard to convince him along the way.
Okay.